Hey, Witch Mob, welcome to the Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast. Episode 10 is about one of those once-in-a-lifetime epic journeys across the equatorial line on the island of Borneo. Absolutely magical. If you've been listening, you already know I'm a traveller. One of my favourite things to do on the road is follow untravelled paths. Those little-known dirt tracks in the outback, lost winding tracks along riverbanks or mountain trails. I've avoided places like Goa in India or Phuket in Thailand because I don't travel to immerse myself in backpackers. I travel to learn about the culture, history, music, art, food, and people of the countries I visit. For me, these are the best reasons to travel. Shout outs to Leanne and Erica in Australia. Thanks for listening. Chris and Jan in the USA. Katie in the UK. Maxine in Canada. And Jorge in Ecuador. Thank you for listening, everyone, and I'm loving your comments. Keep them coming. This story is set on the island of Borneo in Kalimantan, and it's called The Tampon King. Secret Garden is a 5-star vegan and vegetarian restaurant where you can have an incredible chef-to-table experience for breakfast, lunch or dinner. Our chef is an expert in food allergies and intolerances and can cater to any dietary need from gluten, sugar or dairy-free to creating a low FODMAPs menu or catering to any other dietary requirements you have. Stop by Secret Garden for an amazing meal or order online and pick up anytime. Grab a dessert or an ice cream while you're there. Groups are welcome with a reservation and you can discuss a custom-made menu for your event with the chef. Secret Garden has an extensive menu with excellent prices and you won't be disappointed. Mention the Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast for a complimentary drink. The Tampon King. The remote wilderness of Kalimantan beckoned. After 2 challenging terms of teaching English to children, a wild Borneo Island adventure was just what I needed. Sailing down great rivers, blazing a trail through the oldest rainforest in the world, climbing magnificent mountain ranges. Wait, on the other hand, no more mountains. Not after Mount Bromo. Mount Bromo is in the Tenagar caldera in eastern Java, and the story about that particular mountain is about 9 weeks away. So keep your hats on because there's a crazy story about that mountain coming up. Altitudes aside, I could happily laze on beaches and sip chilled coconuts, learn to scuba dive, or even go bird watching. The change of pace would do me good. I discarded my work clothes and stuffed the tattered remains of well-worn travelling clothes into the lighter backpack with glee. Then I caught a Bimo, that's a minivan that travels around Indonesia, across town to the port to catch my boat. My eccentric circle of mad friends were either back at work or still recovering from Friday night's farewell party. As the island of Java receded into the distance, I felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Java had been lots of fun, but it was time to move on. Kalimantan covers half of Borneo's total land area. Divided into 4 districts, its forests, rivers, beaches, and the rich culture of its Dayaks, including Iban, Punan, and Banwak tribes, made it the perfect place to escape the craziness of civilization. As the ancient creaking boat chugged for 18 hours across the Karimata Strait, I had plenty of time to decide what to do in Kalimantan. Spreading my sleeping bag out on the deck, I gazed at the stars and thought about the ultimate challenge, to traverse one of the Earth's most rugged islands from one side to the other. It was one of the world's most remote locations and the third largest island on the planet. By the time the ship arrived at the approaches to Banjarmasin on the southern coast of Borneo, I had made up my mind. The floating rust bucket inched up the short Bromo Canal and finally berthed its creaking hull at Banjarmasin port on the Burrito River just after sunup. Even at that hour, Trisakti Wharf seethed with humanity. The long pier was abuzz with men shouting and running in all directions, loading and unloading cargo. A dozen drivers tried to whisk me away. After spending all night lying on a hard deck, I wanted to walk and stretch out my stiff limbs. The river city of Banjarmasin is the capital city of South Kalimantan and a major centre for trade and tourism. Snuggled into the confluence of the Matapura and Burrito rivers, the Venice of Borneo is crisscrossed by numerous rivers and waterways. After I settled into a hotel, I took a trip up the mighty Burrito River to the floating market on a klotok boat, a kind of river bus. Surrounded by lush rainforest on either side, the tightly packed wooden and bamboo stilt houses lined the tropical landscape. The clamour of the colourful market was incredible. Colours, aromas, buzzing activity. I had never seen anything quite like it in the Indonesian archipelago. The following day, I took a cruise up the Matapura River. Hundreds of boats of all descriptions chugged up and down the waterway. The rivers were the lifeblood of Banjarmasin, and everything revolved around them. The road to Balikpapan meandered through the flat lowlands and vast mangrove swamps before climbing into the Meratus mountain range, which divides South Kalimantan into two regions with a tangle of rivers cascading down either side. Dayak tribes formed the minority of the population. The indigenous majority was the Banjar, lush with dense tropical rainforests. Wide rivers snaked into the hinterland and toward the coast. I stopped often and stayed in tiny mountain villages along the way. Bare-breasted women handcrafted objects from raw materials. After striking up a conversation, they invited me into their homes to stay for a few days at a time. "Where you from?" curious children asked, clamouring to view the pale farang from another land. In Bahasa Indonesia, farang is a foreigner. So if you're walking around and hear the word farang, that just means you're a foreigner. "Why you don't have husband?" giggled the women. Deeply impressed, I observed the Kalimantan way of life in their art, dance, music, ancestral dress, games, and ceremonies. Twisting mountain roads wound through vast forests, dissected at regular intervals by rivers and streams. As I neared the coast, the energy level subsided from languorous to almost comatose. A couple of weeks later, I rocked into the seaside town of Balikpapan, East Kalimantan's second biggest town, and was greeted with the pungent aroma of durian. The fruit smells like a combination of sweaty sneakers and day-old vomit. Some of the buses had no durian signs inside their doors, but smoking was acceptable. Blocking my nose to try this bizarre fruit, I was surprised at its sweetness. "Is good, yes?" asked the vendor. "It's good," I agreed. I whizzed around the old Dutch-built section of the oil town, visited the incredible Wanariset Orangutan Reserve, and then to Mangar Beach to the west of Balikpapan for a weekend of fishing with the locals. Inching my way up the coast, I stopped near Tanjung Harapan near Samboja, a gorgeous beach lined with mangrove forest. Finally, I headed to the river city of Samarinda and hung out for a day or two, feeling my way around. I should say at this point that my command of Bahasa Indonesia was fairly good, and I was able to communicate easily with the local people. I got back to the Hidayah Hotel one afternoon to find brothers Steve and Jared in the garden, arguing about what kind of tour they were going to take. That's where I met them. This was the beginning of a tumultuous friendship. I want to walk across Borneo, said Steve. I want to do a river trip, said Jared. They let me show them around the Chinese temple and Pasar Seguri. We saw some interesting Banjar and Malayu architecture and the fabulous old Bugis schooners. We bought Samarindan silk sarongs and ate at Warung Jango in the evenings. This was a fantastic restaurant on the riverbank that practically everybody went to. We met some other travellers who also wanted to traverse the island at an outdoor cafe. After dinner and several bars, including the floating disco at the foot of the Mahakam Bridge, Ryland suggested we hire an easygoing guide and take our time. The one thing we all had in common was time. By the end of the week, we were making plans to traverse the wild jungles of Borneo by boat and on foot. We hooked up with the magical Mangoen Koesomo, Mango for short, boat captain and guide extraordinaire, and within 2 days we were headed up the Mahakam River on a huge wooden longboat. This was Jared's river trip. The boys filled the hull with cartons of bintang. Bintang is beer, a lager with a Dutch influence. They filled the boat with beer and a million rambutans, and we relaxed on the deck, drinking lukewarm beer and sucking the seeds from the sweet fruit as we chugged past Lower Janan, watching the languid lifestyle of people living on the riverbanks as we passed by. At Tangerong, we visited the State Museum of Woolawarman, the Malayan king's former royal palace. The old capital of the Sultanate of Kutai was also the site of the annual Erau festival, where Dayaks perform tribal dance and ritual ceremonies in traditional costume. This was the yearly festival that celebrates the anniversary of the city, Tangerong City. There's lots of cultural activities going on during the festival. At one point early in our journey, Steve pulled a red bucket out of his pack, and we ended up using it for everything: laundry, dishwashing, bathing, tipping river water over our heads when it got too hot, keeping beer cold, and cleaning up spew after a night of overindulgence. The bucket became our best friend. Before they left home, Jared complained about Steve packing all kinds of weird stuff. We disagreed. The bucket was a great idea. Why hadn't any of the rest of us thought to pack a bucket? It wasn't long before Ryland discovered our grinning captain didn't mind a big fat joint every now and then. Whenever something amused him, Mango laughed like a flock of chattering parrots. We were in for a fabulous trip. Holly and Vivian were the other 2 women on the boat. Vivian was Ryland's girlfriend, and Holly was her sister. They were great company, relaxed and chatty, unlike the brothers who were constantly at each other's throats. They reminded me of the Marx brothers. Apparently, we had Groucho and Curly in our group. To keep the peace, mostly through conversation and card games, Holly and I managed to keep them separated much of the time. As we drifted past settlements and villages, longhouses and shanties on the riverbanks, we got a glimpse into daily life on the river. People washed and bathed in floating raft huts. Timber mills lined the riverbank. Highway-like signs and distance boards dotted either side of the river, and floating gas stations featured in each town. Unpredictable weather and river conditions made the trip a true adventure. We pulled into pleasant villages like Long Iram to moor for the night, climbing into sleeping bags covered with mosquito nets after a feast of delicious nasi goreng, river prawns, fried bean curd, and banana fritters. However, by the end of the boat trip, I couldn't face it. I'm sick to death of bean curd and nasi goreng, I whined. Nasi goreng is fried rice, and honestly, you can only eat so much of it. There are limits to good cuisine, people. Do not eat too much of anything, including gorgeous fried rice, which is amazing when you eat it the first 15 times, but after that, it gets a bit much, you know? We travelled as far as Long Bagun on the wide brown Mahakam River, travelling through the Muara Muntai, famous for its streets of boardwalks built over mudflats, and took a side trip in a motorised canoe across Semayang Lake to Melintang to admire the beautiful scenery. We saw hundreds of water birds and hornbills, fish eagles, herons, iridescent blue kingfishers, and leaf monkeys, langurs and proboscis monkeys, freshwater dolphins, and a glorious sunset. The following day, we travelled to Tanjung Isui on Lake Jampang. I got that pronunciation wrong. I'm 100% sure of it, so if there's any Indonesians listening, please forgive me. Surrounded by spectacular lakes and wetlands, we visited Manggar, Barambai, Rabok, Tempatung, Kedang Mubang, and a village floating on rafts in the middle of the lake, complete with dogs, cats, chickens, and marabou storks. The unique architecture of longhouses fascinated us. Traditionally, they were built without nails. We took another side trip from Tanjung Isui to the nearby Mangkong Longhouse via the Ohong River through a fabulous scenic stretch of riverside jungle. It was there that I bought a stack of cloth strips to cope with my unexpected and early menstruation. Anticipating similar events, Vivian and Holly bought approximately 3 tons of Benwak Ulap Doyo, fibre-free cloth made from doyo leaf. As a woman traveller dealing with menstruation in some of the most remote corners of the world is probably one of the biggest challenges. The stores do not have tampons. They don't have pads. Where I live, the store does not have tampons. It's not a problem for me. I'm menopausal, but I really seriously wonder, what do these women use if there's no tampons in the store? Anyway, let's go back to the story. Torrential rain bucketed down sporadically as we traversed the Bornean interior. The Mahakam River and its tributaries filled fast. The reality of Kalimantan was far different from my visions of vast, unexplored tracts of dense virgin jungle, steaming swamps, riverboats, rainforest filled with orangutans and savage headhunters. We spent a lot of time avoiding huge log booms and barge loads of thick ironwood headed downstream to the mills, and traders racing downriver on bamboo rafts. Illegal logging was rife. Cruising through Banjut, Bananga, and other riverside settlements, we stopped for supplies and to wander round the villages from time to time. The boys were devastated when we couldn't find Bintang beer. Mango saved the day with his secret bottle of whiskey. To compensate, we rolled joints more often. Kalimantan's fertile riverbanks produced ample supplies of high-quality mole for sale at reasonable prices. Mango took care of those negotiations to get the best deals, Finding good weed anywhere in the world when you're traveling is an absolute bonus. Just don't get caught in places where it's illegal. At Long Bagun, we had to abandon our beloved ship. At that point, after becoming firm friends with his motley collection of rascally charges, Mango decided he wanted to continue the journey across the island with us. He sent the boat back to Samarinda with another captain. We climbed into canoes and tackled the amazing river rapids between Long Bagun and Long Pahangai en route to Tiong Ohang. At Long Apari, we abandoned the longboats and began our trek overland across Mula Mountain. As our raggedy little group tramped through the rough and uncharted terrain of the primary forest, an incredible wildwood towered all around us. We stopped to fish often and camped in the jungle each night. After dusk, we could hear monkeys chattering and whooping in the trees. While enjoying the trek, I was having terrible menstrual problems, and within a few days had depleted my supplies of tampons and rough cloth. Vivian and Holly had given me all of their tampons, but they weren't enough. I had previously thought it would be mosquitoes that gave me a killer disease. Malaria was nothing compared to my horrific monthlies. So it turned out that what I had was endometriosis, which resulted in a hysterectomy a few years later. Endometriosis is actually a very serious disease, and not nearly enough research has been done on it. As we hiked deeper into the forest, I wondered what the Dayak women did about problem periods. I didn't ask, suffering cramps and heavy bleeding in silence. When it started raining, we took shelter in a mountain village and holed up in a longhouse for 3 days. During our stay, my inconvenient problem vanished. While there, we hung out with the Iban villagers, and some of the women taught us how to cook Iban cuisine. The boys took off to go fishing, and we were shown some grisly souvenirs from the headhunting era. When the rain stopped, we hiked over the tangled jungle plateau between Long Apari and Tanjung Lokan, taking our time and experiencing the thick jungle for over 2 weeks. The dense rainforest was alive with flocks of brilliantly coloured tropical birds and the chatter of orangutans, gibbons, langurs, lorises, and tarsiers. We bumped and giggled over long stretches of exciting rapids, stepped over fallen tree trunks, pulled out leeches, admired endless incredible vistas, had an unscheduled meeting with a reticulated python, spent lazy days fishing, shopped at Barong Tonggok and Eheng, sniffed fields of aromatic lemongrass, avoided being digested by carnivorous pitcher plants, swam in the Jantur Gemuru waterfall, pulled rattan thorns out of our arms, admired the natural black orchid forest at Kursik Luwei, stayed in longhouses decorated with elaborately carved dragons, snakes, birds, and demons, patched our ripped clothing, hunted wild boars with blowguns, and met some lovely locals with elongated earlobes, wearing heavy earrings and sporting intricate lamp-black tattoos. Lamp-black tattoos are created with ink that is made from the soot produced after burning oil or resins or tar. Essentially, it's carbon. So they're creating these tattoos with a form of carbon. Fortunately for us, the Dayaks were no longer collecting human heads. We passed through the traditional Dayak settlements at Sangai Hung, Bua Kiu, Batu Abang, Bobo, and Sai Bulit. As we approached Tanjung Lokan, my problem began again. Thinking it was over, I was unprepared for a second onslaught of unpredictable and heavy periods. We stopped in Tanjung Lokan to explore the caves while I doubled over in agony for a couple of days. Vivian explained the problem to Rylan, but there was nothing anyone could do. Somebody mentioned it to Jared. When I thought I couldn't take any more cramping, Steve produced tampons and period pain pills from his backpack. I couldn't believe it. A guy travelling to the middle of the jungle had brought tampons and a red bucket. Hail Steve, the Tampon King! Life had just become infinitely easier. We wondered aloud what else he had in his magical bag of tricks. He just smiled. We climbed into a longboat and cruised down the Bongon River towards the Kapuas River and pulled into Putusibao for the night. The most exciting part of that day had been the rapids. We shrieked and laughed all the way down the rushing water until we fell down exhausted. The pungent odours of dried fish and mud reached us long before we reached Putusibao, a town built on stilts above the marshlands of the Kapuas River. Arriving at Putusibao, exhausted, we were all too tired to eat and immediately crashed for the night. The gorgeous Kapuas River carried us towards Pontianak on the west coast of Kalimantan through virgin tropical forest. At times, the thick canopy overhead resembled a dimly lit cathedral. The dense foliage was dark and gloomy, with patches of light illuminating strangler figs and thorny rattan vines hanging from towering trees. At Sintang, the boys decided they wanted to visit Bukit Raya National Park and climb Mount Kailam, another damn mountain. After Indonesia, I was over climbing mountains. The group decided to go. Jungle trekking and mountain climbing it was. We ascended once more. My problems started again. How much grief could a girl get in one trip? Again, the Tampon King came to the rescue. He'd packed 2 boxes of tampons. If Steve hadn't been gay, I'd have married him on the spot. As we approached Pontianak, our 2,000-kilometre adventure was about to come to a close. Rylan, Vivian and Holly were headed back to Canada. Steve and Jared wanted to see more of Kalimantan. I was still undecided between seeking out a local witch doctor to help me solve my terrible menstrual issues or going to the beach. We walked around Pontianak, visiting the Kadria Palace, Mangan Waterfall and Pateng Mountain, and Batu Payang, Pasir Panjang and Kijing beaches. After our trip to Mount Palang National Park, we had dinner at a warung near the river. A warung is like a family-owned eatery. They're usually small, found on the roadside, in this case the riverside, but sometimes there are bigger places in the cities that are family-owned, which kind of defines warung. And walked to the Equator Monument, where we stood with 1 foot in the southern hemisphere and 1 foot in the northern hemisphere, and took photos. Steve, Jared and I waved goodbye to Holly, Vivian and Ryland at the airport and headed off to visit Karimata Island before we parted company. "I have something for you," said Steve as we rode back to the hotel in Pontianak. The cheeky grin plastered across his face made me instantly suspicious. "Does it bite?" I joked, wondering what he could possibly have picked up along the way without me seeing. As a farewell gift and tribute to our journey, he presented me with a dusty box of tampons he secretly bought after haggling with a merchant just after we arrived in town. All hail the Tampon King!
Hey there, love bugs! Welcome to the jungle! I'm Nancy Miarelli, your guide to the ecological and entomological, i.e., bug, wonders of Ecuador. With my master's in entomology and a passion for ecology and conservation, I'm here to take you on an unforgettable adventure through the mega diverse forests and more lush than you may have expected mountainsides of Ecuador. This year, I'm excited to offer 2 unique science-focused tours. Join me for a nature journaling course where we'll sit in the grass, sketch, observe, and reflect on all the creatures and plants that we discovered. Or dive deep into evolutionary theory on my evolution tour, where you'll see what you learned in a book that one time growing on the side of a tree. Ready to embark on a journey of discovery? Visit www.scibugs.info, that is Scibugs, SCIBUGS, to learn more or find me, Scibugs, everywhere on the internet. Let's explore Ecuador and all it has to offer together.
There was a fair bit of you in that story, but as a woman travelling around the world, it was a fact of life everywhere I went. No escape, at least until the hysterectomy. In some places, it was difficult, if not impossible, to find tampons or even pads, and I often had to improvise, just like the Benuak Ulap Doyo, a type of cloth made from a leaf that Indonesian women use during their periods. And so as a woman travelling, this is a real issue that needs to be dealt with every single month. And so finding solutions to these, nowadays we have cups, it makes life a lot easier, but women travelling have these issues all the time. So ladies, good luck out there. See you next week, where we travel from Borneo across to Sumatra and we go into the monkey forest for some shenanigans with some gibbons. Do you have any crazy travel stories? What's the most insane thing that happened to you while you were on the road? If you'd like to share, send an MP3 recording of your story or write it into an email and send it to thewitchmob@gmail.com, and it could feature in a future episode. Don't forget to pick up your Who Is This Crazy Hag stickers and totes from Redbubble. Links are in the show notes. The Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast is created, written, read, produced, edited, mixed and published by Ronnie. If you'd like to grab a copy of Few Are Oo, find the paperback on Amazon or email thewitchpod@gmail.com to get an ebook. Also, let us know via email or on Blue Sky at The Witch Pod if you're reading in a book club or a group of friends, so we can give you a shout out. Don't forget to tell us where you are in the world. You can visit The Witch Pod on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music and Castbox, and also Substack and Patreon. See you next week.